Peace and blessings. Welcome back to the channel once again, where we talk all things health and healing from a holistic perspective, and today will be no different. Now, today's conversation is a little bit different from what I'm usually talking about. I'm usually talking about how do we heal physical ailments, conditions, our physical health. Also talk about how do we stay healthy, get healthy, and evolve. And today's conversation is going to be a little bit different because I'm going to be focusing more on traumas, mental health, and emotional healing. Okay. And I think that's an important conversation because when we start to look at how times have shifted, they have shifted greatly. And I think a large part of that is due to social media and its impact on our mental and emotional well-being, and a whole lot of other things, including the pandemic as well. But when you look at some of the statistics, they're a little bit alarming. From 2000 to 2017-18, suicide rates went up 37%. Okay, it then took a small dip for 2 years. And then about from 2011 till the present day, the suicide rates for young people have gone up 60%. Okay, and then when you start to look at the suicide statistics, you see that they're heavily skewed towards males. Males are 4 times more likely to commit suicide, and 80% of the people who commit suicide are males. So it is a huge issue, especially after the pandemic. You saw that we were sheltering in place and, staying away from each other. And as a result of that, it created a lot of loneliness. So it made it worse. And as I start to look out and start to work with people individually, and I'm doing speaking engagements, and I recently did one in London. And as I'm out there, I'm talking about healing from traumas. I realize how important this conversation is. And that's why we're having this conversations today. And so before we get started, I want to say to you, even though I don't know you, I love you. I care about you. And I hope that this conversation I'm having today, if it doesn't touch your life, it touches somebody in your life. Maybe it's your son, maybe it's your husband, maybe it's your wife, maybe it's your mother, maybe it's your father. But I hope that this conversation better equips us for helping each other get through what we need to get through. Because the truth of the matter is we all have traumas and dramas. That is unfortunately how life rolls for most of us. And we have to be able to identify those traumas, and not only be able to identify those, understand how to get help and be willing to do so. And so I send my love to you, and I keep you in my healing prayers. Now, with that being said, it's really important to do this work, and I call it work, not a job work, but the work that we're here to do as spiritual beings. It's truly important to do this work because this is how we break generational cycles and generational curses. It's so important that we do the work for that reason, because what's happening is, and this is really important for my people out there, we often blame our parents for much of the things that we go through in life. We blame them for neglect. We blame them for not loving us enough. We blame them for not allowing us to do certain things. We blame them for breaking up when their relationships don't go well. We blame them for a lot. And as a result, ultimately those things also hurt us as well too. And I think it's really important for us to look at it with a different lens so we can heal. Because the important thing to know and understand about that is that the same way that you have to heal, quite often your parents are also healing from their traumas as well that were passed down from those parents. Okay, so quick example, if you had a father who wasn't as loving, sort of like the movie Fences, right? If you check out the movie Fences with Denzel Washington, you see he had Denzel plays a very tough father who gives a lot of tough love, and the son doesn't think that he loves him. Now, what I will say is that if you were to go back and his son were to do a little bit more probing and say, hey, Dad, how was your relationship with your father? He would have explained to him that his relationship with his father was even worse. And he's nice compared to his father. So, quite often what we experience in the next generation is actually the trauma that they experienced in the previous generation. So it's so important that we know and understand that we can break generational traumas, but we have to be willing to do the work, okay? And to be able to do the work, you have to be able to identify traumas. I meet people all the time that when I'm working with them and we're working with something and they got issues with cholesterol and high blood pressure and they're afraid that they're gonna have a heart attack or a stroke. And we do everything we need to do with the diet. We get them exercising, we get them corrected on their deficiencies, we get the toxicity out of their body, they do my detox, and then they still don't completely heal. Maybe they get physically better, but they don't completely heal. The blood pressure is still high. Then at that point, we gotta ask ourselves, is it unresolved trauma? And that's what it was for me, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. I was diagnosed with high blood pressure at the age of 16 in high school. Only had about 7% body fat. I was I played sports. I went on to play sports in college. And I'll tell you, getting diagnosed at 16, I overlooked it, swept it under the rug, couldn't figure out what it was. So I figured it was genetic, especially since my family passed down diabetes, hypertension, etc. And what I will tell you is that when I went on my spiritual journey and started to heal and resolve a lot of the traumas that I went through, what I realized was I was healing the child and not actually healing the adult, okay? And when I healed that child, the version of me, that child that was, traumatized and still not healing from all the hurt, that's when my blood pressure all of a sudden not only went down, but it stayed down, okay? So I was explaining this to somebody and I was telling them, like, maybe you have a broken heart. Maybe that's what your real issue is. And so we're gonna dive into what does that journey look like to take those first steps towards healing, because healing always begins with you. I'll tell you that therapy is important. All of that is important, but it always starts with you, okay? You have to be a willing participant, you have to be open-minded, and you have to be open-hearted to be able to heal yourself. And so we're gonna dive into it right here, right now. And please share this video with as many people as possible, because I think it's so important that we start to get this kind of message out, because a lot of people are suffering. A lot of people are going through mental, cognitive, emotional, spiritual warfare, and don't know how to deal with it and don't know how to articulate the conversations to be able to start the healing journey. And I'm hoping that this will help you in that regard. Okay, so the first thing let's start with is, what is trauma? Okay, trauma isn't, most people when they think trauma, they think like physical trauma, but when you think about the origins of the word, it comes from the Greek, it means a wound. And a wound is a scar. It's not well, let me correct that. A wound is not a scar, it is a present wound, okay? And what I mean, the difference between the two is a scar is something that is on its way to healed, okay? A scar may be to the point where it's actually healed, but it leaves a mark as a reminder. But a wound means that it's still open, okay? And it's important to understand what trauma is, especially when we're thinking about from the perspective that I'm talking about, because we're talking about unresolved trauma, okay? So that's the really important difference, is that we're talking about unresolved trauma. Things that happened to you that didn't get resolved, that are still lingering in your life today, that are still impacting your decisions, that is still impacting you not only mentally and emotionally, but also physically as well too. And that's probably another video, okay? So the first things first, trauma is a wound, not a scar, okay? Most people will say that it's a scar. They'll say, yeah, I went through it, but I'm healed, which is a scar. But most people, including myself, at one point, I was not healed, and most people aren't healed. And I'll tell you, the quicker that people say, oh no, I healed from that, the quicker they say it, the more convinced that I know that they're probably not healed, okay? And so, I'll tell people in regards to that, it's okay not to be okay. I had to tell myself that, all right? So it's okay not to be okay. The other thing that's really important is that when you go through a trauma, is that some of the impact of a trauma is that it causes us to disconnect and disassociate from parts of ourselves, okay? And not only that, when you disconnect from you, okay, you're essentially disconnecting from source. You're disconnecting from God, okay? And the reason why I say that is because, you know, like, I don't believe that there's any mistakes, you know? I believe that any and everything that happens on earth could involve us and has a reasoning, and it's our job to, as students, to figure out what that is. And so if that be true and we're here on this earth, then we have purpose, we have meaning. And what that means is that if we have purpose and meaning, that means that we were sent here for a divine purpose. And so if we have a divine purpose, that means that God is living within us. So God is within all of us, okay? But what happens is when we go through trauma, we disconnect from that part of us. So we lose our divine purpose. It's hard for us to connect to our divine purpose as a result of that, because our divine purpose is connected to our spirit. And our spirit is connected to God's source. Understand? So when we go through certain traumas and those traumas are unresolved, we're disconnecting from ourselves. We're disowning ourselves, which means that we're disconnecting from source, which is God, okay? The other thing that's really important to understand about trauma is that when trauma happens to you, it's also happening for you, okay? Now, I'm gonna talk about that a little bit later, but the point that I mean about that is this. The trauma that happened to you, it happened in the past, and that's the only place it does happen. But the only thing that happens is when it's unresolved, it's also happening right now in the present too, because you're reliving that trauma in every moment and probably in every experience of your life. So let me give you an example. You go through a trauma where you were possibly, let's say I was abused as a child. And as a result of going through that trauma, I disconnect from people because while I was being abused, in my mind, I shut down from allowing people to hurt me. So as let's say I was being, you know, beaten with a belt or something like that. And during that beating, my mind shuts off and says, I'm gonna turn off my pain from when people inflict pain on me, which means that I'm gonna turn off myself from others, okay? So what'll happen is down the line, I may not be able to connect with others, okay? I may even reverse that and now become so violent, I inflict the pain on others that I received when I was a child, okay? So it always has this effect where it impacts you and causes you to compensate, to adapt to your life situation, okay? But in that moment that I was going through that trauma as a child, the lasting effect isn't the moment or the act of what was happening. The lasting effect is what was going on in my mind emotionally and spiritually as I was going through that bout. Because that is what's gonna live with me, you know, as a 30, 40-year-old adult, you know, moving forward in life, that's gonna live with me. And so how I move and interact with people is also going to be impacted based upon that experience because it's living with me. It didn't get resolved, okay? So that's another major point of trauma as well, especially unresolved trauma as well. So what we're gonna get into now is some signs and symptoms of unresolved trauma. And again, do not take this as a pointing finger. A lot of these things that I'm sharing with you are the things that I had to do some self-evaluation and self-assessment and see within myself, look in the mirror, see within myself and said, yeah, that sounds like me. That sounds like what I'm going through. And it takes a lot to admit that. It takes a lot to take ownership of that. But that is the only road. That's the only door that you can take to go through to actually get to your healing, okay? So please understand that, all right? So don't take this as, you know, a scarlet letter or a mark of a beast. This is just simply a way of understanding you, getting to know thyself a little bit better so that you can get to the healing in life, so that you can get to that higher version of yourself. Okay, so the first thing, or one of the things that will be a sign and symptom that you have unresolved trauma, will be an inability to fully express your emotions. Okay, an inability to fully express your emotions. You will repress anger, you will suppress hurt, you will suppress your ability to give emotions as well too. So an inability to fully express emotions. Okay, so that's one of the signs and symptoms that you will experience. Also, being easily triggered. Okay, and what that means is that it doesn't take much. One situation that is very similar to something that you've gone through, and it may have nothing to do with you, and you sort of are in the line of fire of it, and you're easily triggered by it. Okay, somebody, you think that somebody's telling you a lie, and maybe you grew up and your parents told you lies, and and now you're easily triggered by anybody who lies to you. Because there's a difference between a person who says, man, this person is lying to me, and they just say, hey, they're lying, so I'm gonna go about my way, I send you away with love. Versus a person who the very the very instance that they think that somebody's lying to them, like they explode. Okay, so being easily triggered is also a sign that there's some unresolved trauma as well too. Also, trauma bonding. Okay, trauma bonding is whenever you go through a certain trauma, guess what? The people that you meet and connect with in life, you meet and resonate with people who have gone through the same kind of trauma. That's called trauma bonding. And a lot of people think that is healthy, but quite often what happens is that it literally becomes an environment that is created by the individuals where they essentially allow themselves to self-sabotage, okay? Which is moving into the next one, which is self-sabotaging. That is definite sign that you have some unresolved trauma as well too. You're supposed to be your greatest advocate, and you're supposed to be the person who's always cheering yourself, even when nobody else is. And if you're in a space where you feel like maybe when it comes to relationships, maybe when it comes to work, maybe when it comes to, you have this special skill, and everybody around you know it. And each time you put yourself out there to kind of take yourself to the next level and show your greatness, you sabotage it. That is a sign of a lot of unresolved trauma, okay? Another thing that is also a sign is being emotionally erratic, or a lack of emotional intelligence. Whenever you can't control your emotions, what it means is you lack self-regulation. Okay, and so if you can't control your emotions, even with the simplest things, that's probably a sign of unresolved trauma as well too. Okay, there are also physical signs too. So a couple examples would be chronic headaches, chronic fatigue, chronic pain in the body. You're always in fight or flight mode, meaning you're always sort of in a state of anxiety. Autoimmune conditions could also be a sign of unresolved trauma as well too. And that's a much deeper one to dive into, but essentially when your immune system is attacking yourself, I want you to think about all the things that we've been talking about, before this, the self-sabotaging, attacking yourself, being easily triggered and trauma bonding, essentially attacking yourself. Typically people will have a low self-worth or value of themselves, again, attacking yourself. And what is happening in an autoimmune condition? You're attacking yourself, okay? So sometimes spiritual and emotional manifestations become physical manifestations as well too, okay? Other things are addiction. Addictions are often a sign of unresolved trauma as well, because quite often the addiction is trying to feed something to sort of cure away the stress, or cure away the unwanted emotion. So you start to feel depressed about the trauma that you went through, and all of a sudden the sugar comes out to make life sweet again. Okay, so addictions are quite often a sign of unresolved trauma as well too. And then another thing is trouble with asking for help. You rather suffer in silence. The people who quite often, also this is the crazy thing, those same people will be the kind of people who will go all out and do everything for everybody. I mean, these are the people who show up unasked for, and they give all of themselves and pour into people. And when it comes to getting help for themselves, they won't allow anybody to help them. They'll suffer in silence. And then what'll happen is when you finally do ask to help, you know, they won't allow you to help them. Okay, and then they blow up emotionally. Okay, so if that sounds very familiar, which used to sound very familiar to me, then that's definitely a sign of unresolved trauma, possibly as well too. Resistance to positive change. Okay, so you know that your diet is trash, and you know that that's causing you a lot of your health issues. And despite knowing all of that, guess what? You still don't do anything about changing your diet. I mean, you get a chef and they make all your food, and guess what? You still order out, okay? That's a sign, okay? When you have resistance to positive change. And people are coming to you and trying to be positive, and no matter what they say and how positive it is, you just will not allow any space for it in your perspective, okay? That could be a possible sign of unresolved trauma as well too. And then always pretending everything is all good. When you're one of those people that you say, hey, you good? Yeah, oh yeah, I'm great. But inside, you know that you're dying, okay? You know that you're sad. You know that you're torn apart. If you're constantly pretending like everything is always good, that could be a sign or symptom that you're struggling with unresolved trauma. Another thing that's sort of a sign and symptom, and most people are really familiar with this one, is hurt people hurt people. When you see someone who's constantly hurting people, and it may not be even the kind of hurt that you're typically thinking about. They get in a relationship and they convince people to fall in love with them. And as soon as the person falls in love with them, they disappear and they ghost them, okay? That could be a sign. That could be a sign that you have unresolved trauma, okay? Because hurt people, okay? Another sign and symptom could be unexplained psychological symptoms. When you're getting ADD, when you're getting anxiety out of nowhere, these unexplained psychological symptoms that you possibly didn't have before and now you all of a sudden have now, they could be as a result of this unresolved trauma that has piled up so high that now it's taking its toll and having a physical manifestation in your life. And then the last thing is a monkey mind. I call it the monkey brain. And what that means is that your mind is constantly running. All of these thoughts are constantly running. Even when you try to go to sleep, you have problems going to sleep because your mind is constantly running. And the mind does that because what it's trying to do is hide itself from those thoughts about the trauma that you're unwilling to heal. And so you go into this monkey mind state where your mind is always thinking about something. It can't not stop thinking, okay? And so you have problems with sleeping, you have problems with concentrating, and as a result of that, you know, it impacts your life. So that's also a sign and symptom of trauma. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this. This is sort of like the spiritual mode that I'm in right now in terms of healing. As you guys know, I take a holistic perspective when it comes to health and healing. And I believe that this is just as important as the nutrition that I talk about, the exercise, the balance with nature, the getting enough sleep, the drinking enough water. This part is just as important because ultimately this part is causing a lot of the mischief that you're seeing in the other areas of your life. Okay, because quite often what we're doing is we're not giving ourselves self-love because we don't think that we deserve it because we've gone through these traumatic and dramatic situations in life. And so this is why this year I decided, I had all these books in my mind that I was gonna write, and I was gonna write another health book, and then I decided to write this book, Life is My Guru. okay? And in this book, what I talk about is essentially how life isn't happening to you, it's happening for you. And so the book is literally a practical guide to understanding what your life experiences are trying to teach you. Because I believe that our life experiences are simply a spiritual curriculum that is designed by ourselves, our spiritual guides, God, for us to evolve and to become the highest versions of ourselves. But we have to be willing to do the spiritual work, the emotional work, to heal ourselves, to actually experience the highest version of ourselves so that we can be in our divine purpose. And so I wanted to share this book with you because inside of the book, you know, I have a lot of my life stories and how I pulled the wisdom out of each of those life stories. And I have a lot of the wisdom that we talked about today, just in more depth inside of this book. So if you're one of those people who want to learn more about healing trauma and resolving trauma, if not for yourself, maybe for your children, maybe for the person you're in a relationship, maybe for your parents, this is definitely the book for you. And so I'm really excited for you guys to read it. Make sure if you have read it, make sure you comment below. Let me know what you think about the book so far. But this has been a beautiful process for me. And I'm going to spend the rest of this year really focused on this in my personal journey. Life is my guru. So until the next time, peace and blessings and Godspeed.